Hey people, it is Saturday evening. It is 9:11 in the evening on September the 20th, and it is about 15 degrees Celsius. Kind of a cool night here in Toronto. And I just stepped into a laneway off of Gerrard Street East. I thought I'd make my way up to St. Jamestown and take a walk around that area. A nighttime walk around what was once regarded as a fairly rough neighborhood here on the east side of downtown. See another laneway going that way. It's been a while since I've done a walk around St. Jamestown, like within the neighborhood, not just walking past it. I don't think I've done a nighttime walk around the neighborhood though. And I think it's debatable whether it's still considered a bad neighborhood or not. It still gets mentioned sometimes in the so-called Toronto hoods as one of them, along with Regent Park and Moss Park here on the east side. And I'll take us up Bleecker Street, which will lead us right into the neighborhood. And that's also known as a bit of a rough area along Bleecker. I think there are some well-known gangs that are associated around that area. All right, that was Central Hospital Lane, and this is Carlton Street. So we're kind of in Cabbagetown now, on the western side of Cabbagetown. St. Jamestown is technically within Cabbagetown, but it's really its own thing. People tend to separate them. That's sort of a landmark on the corner, the Choo Choo Grill. Coffee Shake. I've never been to either of those places. All right, so here's Bleecker. I've walked along here quite a few times, and it never seemed particularly rough to me in any way, but I think there's a housing cooperative or two along here maybe that is the reason for the so-called street cred of the area, or the gang activity, or whatever. There's one of the buildings here. There's another one. It doesn't look rough in any way, really. Bleecker does run through St. Jamestown up ahead, though. Maybe it's that stretch that people are referring to. Because this stretch actually seems pretty nice to me. Nice old historic townhouses. These old apartment buildings. These go all the way over to Sherbourne Street, which is the next street over on the west. Got some more apartments here. Yeah, lots of co-ops along here. They're usually not known for being rough buildings. The Bleecker Parquet. Once we get into St. Jamestown, though, you'll see a big change. It's basically a vertical neighborhood. Over 20 high-rise apartment blocks with a few recent newer additions, which are condos, as well as new rental apartments. There are over 20 towers and a few low-rises as well. Most of them were built from the late 1950s and through the 1960s. So they're showing their age, a lot of the buildings in St. Jamestown. It's a mix of public housing as well as market rental apartments. And a few new condos, as I mentioned. And this is Wellesley Street. This is the southern border of St. Jamestown proper. You can see some of the old towers, these old 1960s era towers here. So I'll take us a little further up Bleecker, but then we'll go into the heart of St. Jamestown and walk around a bit. It's like a community center. There's a public library. There's 2 full-service grocery stores. Some estimates have over 25,000 people living just within the buildings of St. Jamestown, which makes it the densest neighborhood in all of Canada, and one of the densest really in North America. Somebody's up to something up there. Hearing strange noises coming from up above. It's looking towards Sherbourne Street. That really tall one with the lighted top is a fairly new addition. It's a rental apartment tower, built about 5 years ago. There's also a school in the neighborhood. There are a lot of families. It's also made up vastly of immigrants. Many of whom have multiple children. So it's an elementary school in the center of the tower blocks, basically, surrounded by tall towers. It's an old building too, because at one time this was old Victorian housing, like much of Cabbagetown is still made up of, but it was all demolished and cleared out to make way for all these towers. Back in the days of urban renewal, when this was considered an improvement. And the buildings were marketed to sort of an upwardly mobile crowd who wanted to live within walking distance of their office jobs downtown or a quick transit ride. But over the years, all the original residents started drifting away, and new arrivals started settling in the neighborhood, many of whom are immigrants, as I mentioned. See some very tall condo towers over there. Those are technically outside of the neighborhood, but all these buildings sort of get lumped together. And there are more under construction. There's also intensification going on, where some of the empty space between the buildings is going to be densified with more buildings, basically, new additions. I think I can walk through here. There's an old street called Howard Street on the north end, which still has some of the old Victorian building stock that escaped demolition. And there's some shops and restaurants along Howard Street. All right, here's the school. So I was saying, you don't hear too much in the news about violent crime or gang activity coming from St. Jamestown anymore, but it hasn't completely gone away. You do hear the occasional report or story, a shooting or a stabbing or something within the St. Jamestown community, but all in all, I think it's mostly hype these days, really. Here's the old school building, a nice looking older building. Not sure what the enrollment is there. And some of these buildings are decent places to live and others not so much. It all depends on who is running the building or who owns it. Some landlords are respectable and some aren't. There's also been several major fires over the years in a lot of these buildings. I remember in one case, some years back, everyone in the entire building was forced to leave for like a year and a half before they were able to return after a major fire. Might have been that building straight ahead, actually. And then it happened again in another building, but that one wasn't as bad, thankfully. We're heading east towards Parliament Street now. The borders of the neighborhood are Parliament on the east, Sherbourne on the west, Wellesley on the south, and Bloor Street on the north. It's kind of funny that St. Jamestown is basically bordering directly on Rosedale on the north side, which is one of the wealthiest old money neighborhoods in all of Canada, let alone just in Toronto. So it's like a completely different world depending on what side of Bloor Street you're on. You can be walking down a leafy street of 100-plus-year-old mansions in Rosedale, and you can see the towers of St. Jamestown poking up above the trees. I'll make my way over to Howard Street. And if you look closely at some of the buildings, you can see some of them are really in a state of disrepair. And others look better. I think this is another school here. I had a friend who lived in one of these buildings, and her building was actually pretty decent. It was one of the oldest buildings in the neighborhood that went up in the 1950s. She had a good-sized one-bedroom apartment, and the rent was quite affordable, at least for that time. Looks like this building is getting some reno work done. And here are two new condos that went up in recent years. Still no new retail spaces here. On the other side, facing Bleecker Street, though, they have filled up with some shops and restaurants. This one is called the Toronto. And a bunch of the other buildings are named after other Canadian cities. I think those were among the first buildings to be built. You do see people sort of hanging out outside of some of the buildings, socializing or whatever. These are some of the older ones here, the 1950s era buildings.
She was like, oh no, just ice cream. I'm like, I didn't think.
That building is just wrapping up construction. Got some old pre-war walk-up apartments here. This is Glen Road. It'll take you to an entrance to Sherbourne subway station. Sort of like a back entrance. Got nice old townhouses on this side of the street. These nice old apartment buildings. And there's a tunnel at the end of Glen Road that'll take you into Rosedale. It'll take you right onto the Rosedale Valley footbridge over the Rosedale Valley Road. And then on the other side, boom, you're in the wealthiest neighborhood in Toronto, or one of them anyway, depending on how you categorize it. Old money versus new money. Here's some of the shops on Howard Street. Some charming little storefronts. This corner store is open. And here's Bleecker Street again. And another tower is just starting to rise here. It'll also be over 50 stories. Most of the buildings you see all around us here are over 50 stories. The newer wave of towers, anyway. I think the tallest of the old 1960s era St. Jamestown buildings is around 35 or 36 stories, which at that time was very tall for an apartment building. Here's Sherbourne Street. So you got Sherbourne subway station again up on the corner there at Bloor Street. And all these old houses are boarded up across the street here. They're all going to be demolished. And you guessed it, more very tall towers will be built there, at least one. Even taller than the other ones around here. Those are technically not part of St. Jamestown, though. But this part of Sherbourne Street has lots of shops and restaurants to serve the residents. And they can also go to Parliament Street for more shops and restaurants.
If I wanted to send this to whoever, maybe I'm a real bad thing. All year, the big thing was all the bats were like working.
And one of the two grocery stores that are up ahead, the Fresh Co. The other one is a, what is it? Food Basics, I think, on Wellesley Street. I never go to that one. I do go to the Fresh Co here, though. Actually, that's where I'm going right now. So I'm going to start to wrap up the video. Hope you enjoyed the Saturday night walk around St. Jamestown on the east side of downtown. Some still consider it a hood. But as you can see, there wasn't really much to be afraid of during my little walk through there. So leave a comment down below if you enjoyed the walk, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Also make sure you hit that notification bell, that way you won't miss any of my videos. If you'd like to support the channel, there are links in the description where you can do so via PayPal as well as via my merch store. Or you can also support the channel by becoming a channel member or by sending a super thanks if you prefer. And you can find me on Instagram also under KContinuum. So thanks for watching, and thanks to all the channel members, and be sure to keep checking back, because as always, I will continue.